April 18, 1943. Somewhere over the Solomon Islands. The morning sun burned through the Pacific haze as a formation of silver-blue Grumman F6F Hellcats climbed into the sky. Their wings glinted against the deep ocean below, engines rumbling like thunder rolling across the water. Inside one cockpit, Lieutenant James "Red" Adams wiped the sweat from his brow. His goggles were fogging, his gloved hands trembling slightly on the throttle. Ahead, the radio crackled. Enemy bogies spotted, 6 zeros, Angels 15. The Hellcat pilots tightened their formation. Through the canopy glass, the first enemy silhouettes appeared, sleek, agile Mitsubishi A6M0s slicing through the sunlight like knives. The Japanese pilots saw them too, and laughed. To them, the Hellcat was a brute, a clumsy hulk of steel. It looked heavy, slow, and far from graceful compared to their nimble Zeros. But appearances can deceive. Adams could hear the faint whine of his Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine at full climb. His machine weighed nearly twice that of the Zero, yet it climbed with brutal determination. He glanced at his wingman, Ensign Charles "Buddy" Harper, who gave a quick nod through his mask. The Zeros split into a perfect V formation, textbook Japanese discipline. The lead pilot, Lieutenant Tetsuo Iwamoto, was one of Japan's most experienced aces. He'd seen dozens of American planes fall in flames, their pilots never knowing what hit them. The Hellcat, he thought, would be no different. As the two formations converged, the Pacific sky erupted into chaos. Tracer rounds streaked past. The smell of burnt oil and cordite filled the air. Iwamoto dove on the nearest Hellcat, pulling a perfect Immelman turn, an elegant maneuver that no Wildcat or P-40 could follow. But this wasn't a Wildcat. The Hellcat rolled and followed, its 6.50 caliber Brownings roaring like thunder. For a split second, the sky was filled with smoke and metal. Iwamoto's Zero burst into flame, its paper-thin fuselage shredded by the heavy American firepower. Adams watched it spiral down, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Jesus, he's going down. I got him. Nice shooting, Red. Harper shouted over the radio. The remaining Zeros hesitated, circling cautiously. Their laughter faded, replaced by confusion. The Hellcats were climbing again, fast, impossibly fast for their size. The tables had turned. For months, the Japanese had mocked this new American fighter. Word had spread through the ranks that it was sluggish and overbuilt. But on that April morning, the Hellcat proved itself a predator. By the end of the engagement, 5 Zeros had fallen to 3 Hellcats. Not one Hellcat was lost. The Pacific wind carried the smoke across the sea, where it vanished into the horizon. As Adams flew back toward his carrier, he looked at the ocean below and thought of the men he'd just fought. Skilled, fearless, and loyal. Yet doomed by their faith in a machine that could no longer match America's new weapon. The Hellcat had arrived. And it was only the beginning. Months before that April morning, the war in the Pacific had looked grim. The Japanese Zero reigned supreme, untouchable, unstoppable, and unmatched in the sky. From the Philippines to Midway, American pilots whispered its name like a curse. The Zero could outturn anything. It climbed like smoke. And it killed with elegance. But deep in Bethpage, Long Island, in the cold winter of 1942, the engineers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation were plotting revenge. Their hangars smelled of oil, metal, and ambition. Men in grease-stained overalls moved between massive aluminum frames that looked like sleeping beasts. At the center of it all stood a broad-shouldered man with a cigarette clenched in his teeth, Leroy Grumman himself, founder of the company and a former Navy pilot. "We don't need beauty," Grumman told his engineers. "We need a killer that can bring our boys home." The U.S. Navy had learned hard lessons from the early months of the war. The F4F Wildcat, though rugged, was outclassed. Pilots survived only through grit, teamwork, and the revolutionary thatch weave, a desperate tactic invented by Lieutenant Commander John Thatch to counter the Zero's agility. But even Thatch knew it wasn't enough. So Grumman's team tore apart everything they knew about fighter design. They didn't want a plane that could dance with the Zero. They wanted one that could crush it. The new design had to be faster, stronger, and deadlier, something that could take a hit, fight back, and still make it home. The engineers wrapped thick armor around the cockpit, added self-sealing fuel tanks, and built wings strong enough to take punishing dives. And then came the heart, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a 2,000 horsepower monster that could rip through the sky at over 380 miles per hour. The first time it roared to life in the hangar, the walls shook, and everyone knew they were staring at the soul of a new kind of warbird. The prototype was rough, bulky, and nothing like the sleek Zero. Some test pilots even joked it looked like a flying brick. But when it took off, it climbed with power no one expected. One of those test pilots, Bob Hall, described the feeling. You could sense it wanted to fight. It wasn't graceful, it was angry. It felt alive. The Navy approved production almost immediately, naming it the F6F Hellcat. By the summer of 1943, carriers across the Pacific began receiving their first squadrons. And with them came new hope. The Hellcat was built to give rookie pilots a fighting chance. Its wide landing gear made carrier landings forgiving. Its cockpit visibility was excellent. And most importantly, it could take hits that would have shredded a Zero to pieces. While the Japanese relied on lightweight speed, the Americans now relied on raw endurance and firepower. 6. 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns gave the Hellcat teeth sharper than anything in the Pacific. But no one knew just how effective it would be, not yet. The first missions would tell the story. When those massive blue Hellcats first rolled off the deck of the USS Yorktown and climbed into the blazing Pacific sky, the Japanese laughed. They called it the Flying Barrel. They stopped laughing the day it started falling them from the sky by the hundreds. The beast Grumman built was about to rewrite the laws of aerial combat. September 1, 1943. South Pacific, near Marcus Island. The flight deck of the USS Yorktown shimmered under the tropical sun. Below deck, sailors hauled belts of .50 caliber ammunition, linking round after round until the belts looked like brass serpents coiled and ready to strike. Above, the newest weapon of the Pacific War waited, Grumman F6F Hellcats lined up in perfect rows, their dark blue paint gleaming like ocean steel. A young pilot named Ensign William "Billy" O'Neill adjusted his flight helmet as the air boss barked orders. His heartbeat thumped through the leather ear cups. The deck trembled as one by one, the massive radial engines roared to life, 2,000 horsepower each, spitting fire from their exhaust stacks. Launch the Hellcats. The signal officer waved his flag, and O'Neill's machine was hurled off the deck into the blazing blue. His stomach dropped as the carrier vanished below. The Pacific opened wide, vast, endless, and deadly. This was no training exercise. This was the Hellcats' first taste of war. Ahead lay Marcus Island, a Japanese stronghold bristling with anti-aircraft guns and fighter patrols. As the American strike group neared, a swarm of Zeros rose from the island like hornets. The Japanese pilots were confident. They had heard of this new American fighter, heavier, slower, impossible to turn. Easy prey. The Hellcats pressed forward. O'Neill's squadron leader, Lieutenant Commander Edward "Butch" O'Hare, the Navy's first Medal of Honor recipient, gave a simple command over the radio. Keep formation. Don't dogfight them. Make them come to us. The two sides collided in the clouds. The first Zero dove head-on, its 20mm cannons flashing. O'Neill felt the bullets rake across his wing, thuds like hammer blows on steel. His instinct screamed to pull away, but his training kicked in. He stayed level, squeezed the trigger, and his 6 Brownings unleashed a storm. The Zero disintegrated mid-turn, wings shearing off as smoke trailed behind it like a comet. O'Neill gasped. So this is what 2,400 rounds per minute sounds like. Below him, Butch O'Hare rolled his Hellcat into a dive, chasing two more Zeros that tried to split. He lined up the lead and fired. The Japanese pilot tried to roll away, but the Hellcat's speed in the dive was unmatched. Gravity favored the heavier machine. The Zero burst into flame before it could complete the turn. The radio crackled with disbelief. They can't outclimb us. They can't outrun us either. What had once been the Zero's domain, speed, altitude, maneuver, was now contested. The Hellcat could dive from higher, strike harder, and live through hits that would have shredded any other fighter. By the time the Hellcats returned to the Yorktown, the pilots were silent. O'Hare broke the radio silence with calm disbelief. 10 confirmed kills. No losses. The deck crew erupted in cheers as the Hellcats touched down. Mechanics counted bullet holes, patched torn skin, and marveled that the planes still flew perfectly. In Tokyo, Japanese officers studying after-action reports refused to believe what they read. Impossible, one colonel muttered. The Zero cannot be outflown. But the numbers didn't lie. From Marcus Island to Tarawa, from the Marshalls to Truck Lagoon, the Hellcat devoured the once invincible Zero. Pilots who had survived early losses in Wildcats were now returning home victorious, sometimes with 5 or more kills in a single sortie. The Flying Barrel was rewriting air combat itself. By the end of 1943, the tide had begun to turn, not through luck, not through numbers, but through raw engineering and the courage of the men who flew Grumman's beast. The Pacific no longer belonged to Japan. It belonged to the Hellcat. June 19, 1944. Philippine Sea. At dawn, the carriers of Task Force 58 drifted like floating cities across the calm blue expanse. The air was heavy with humidity and anticipation. Below deck, men checked machine gun belts, wiped sweat from their brows, and listened for the sound of alarms. They didn't have to wait long. At 10:23 a.m., radar screens lit up with hundreds of blips. A Japanese strike force, over 300 aircraft, was inbound from the west. The code name for the incoming attack soon spread through the decks, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Captain J.J. Jimmy Flatley, one of the Navy's most respected aviators, walked briskly toward the ready room. His pilots looked up, some trying to mask the fear behind forced smiles. Flatley grabbed a stick of chalk and drew on the blackboard. Remember, they'll come in waves. Stay calm, stay high, and pick your targets. You're flying the best damn fighter in the world. Make it count. Minutes later, the flight deck exploded into motion. Catapults roared. One after another, F6F Hellcats shot into the sky. Their folded wings spread like iron angels. The air shimmered under the heat of their engines as they climbed to intercept. High above the Philippine Sea, the sky turned into a battlefield. The first wave of Japanese planes, Zeros, Judas, and Vals, emerged from the horizon in tight formation. From a distance, they looked like a shimmering cloud of dragonflies. The Japanese pilots still believed in the myth of the Zero's superiority. They had been told that the Americans were clumsy, inexperienced, and easy kills. They were wrong. Hellcats dove from the sun, using altitude to their advantage. Their 6 Browning spat fire, ripping into the enemy formation. One Zero burst into flame, then another. The sky filled with smoke trails curling into the sea below. Ensign Ralph "Kid" Hofer, flying from the USS Bunker Hill, grinned behind his oxygen mask. They're falling like flies. He rolled his Hellcat through the enemy formation, chasing a fleeing Zero. The Japanese pilot tried every trick in the book, tight turns, sudden climbs, but the heavier Hellcat stayed glued to his tail. One burst later, the Zero erupted in a fireball. The radios buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Another one down. Good kill, Lenny. Keep your spacing, boys, they're scattering. Within hours, the Pacific sky was littered with wreckage. The Hellcats tore through 4 Japanese attack waves that day. Their training, armor, and speed made the difference. The once proud Japanese Navy Air Arm, veterans of Pearl Harbor, Midway, and Coral Sea, was being annihilated. By dusk, 373 Japanese aircraft were destroyed. The Americans lost only 29 planes. As the last Hellcats returned to their carriers, the sun dipped below the horizon. The flight decks were lined with scorched, bullet-riddled aircraft, their fuselages still steaming from the heat of battle. Sailors counted the victories, painting small red circles on the sides of the planes. Lieutenant Alex Vrashu walked across the deck, still wearing his flight goggles. He had just scored 6 kills in a single sortie, 6 zeros in 8 minutes. He looked up at the evening sky, now quiet, and muttered, "They'll never recover from this." And he was right. The Great Marianas turkey shoot marked the death of Japan's air superiority. The once feared Zero was now a relic of an earlier war, a machine built for a time when agility was everything. The Hellcat had ushered in a new age where firepower, armor, and sheer horsepower ruled the skies. From that day forward, the Japanese no longer controlled the Pacific sky. They merely tried to survive it. But for the men who flew the Hellcat, the war was far from over. Ahead lay Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and the desperate final months of Japan's resistance, where even the skies would burn. April 7, 1945. Off the coast of Okinawa. The air was thick with smoke and salt. The horizon glowed orange from the fires of war. Below, the vast American fleet, hundreds of ships, pounded the beaches with endless artillery. Above, the last defenders of the Japanese Empire took to the sky in desperation. But these were not ordinary pilots. They were kamikaze. The Hellcat pilots knew what was coming. Their job was no longer just to win dogfights, it was to stop flying bombs before they could kill thousands of men below. Lieutenant Tom Hudner and his squadron from VF-83 were already airborne at dawn. They could see the first wave of enemy aircraft rising over Okinawa, roughly 50 in number. Some were Zeros, stripped of armor and guns, carrying nothing but fuel and explosives. Others were Ki-84 Franks, Japan's last capable fighters, flown by boys barely out of flight school. The Japanese command had promised them honor. The Hellcats offered them reality. Eyes up, 2 o'clock high. Kamikazes inbound. The formation scattered. Engines screamed as the Hellcats dove. The air filled with tracers, smoke, and burning metal. One kamikaze dove straight toward the carrier USS Bunker Hill, flames pouring from its engine. Ensign Robert Stone fired a long burst, his .50 calories found their mark. The Zero exploded in midair, raining burning fragments into the sea. Below, sailors on the deck cheered, unaware of how many more were coming. The Hellcats fought relentlessly. Their rugged frames could absorb punishment no other plane could endure. Bullets clanged off armor plating, wings tore, engines overheated, yet they stayed in the fight. In one desperate moment, Lieutenant Hudner's wingman, Ensign Dale Howard, collided midair with a kamikaze while trying to intercept it. His Hellcat lost half a wing but somehow stayed aloft long enough to ditch safely near a destroyer. Hours later, bruised and dazed, he said only 3 words. "Hellcat saved me." It wasn't bravado. It was fact. By mid-1945, the F6F Hellcat had flown over 66,000 combat sorties. It had destroyed more than 5,000 Japanese aircraft, an astonishing 19-to-1 kill ratio, the highest of any fighter in the war. And yet, for all its victories, the men who flew it never forgot what it cost. In the ready rooms of Pacific carriers, walls were lined with photographs, faces of pilots who never came back. Some disappeared into the sea, Others burned with their machines. They were young, brave, and far from home. The Hellcat gave them a fighting chance, but not immortality. When the war finally ended in August 1945, the Hellcats returned home in silence. Many were scrapped or sold for parts. The roaring engines that once filled the skies with defiance were silenced forever. But in those short, furious years, the Hellcat had changed everything. It turned the hunter into the hunted. It gave American pilots the edge they needed to wrest control of the Pacific from the Empire of Japan. And it proved that engineering, when forged with courage, could alter the course of history. In the post-war years, historians would call it the most successful naval fighter ever built. Veterans called it something simpler. The plane that brought us home. As the last surviving Hellcats sit silent in museums today, their chipped navy blue paint and bullet-pocked wings still tell a story, of laughter that turned to fear, of a war machine that defied expectations, and of men who climbed into the sky not knowing if they'd see land again. The Japanese pilots once laughed at the Hellcat. They never laughed again.